So let's continue to variables. A variable in Python is basically when we assign a value to an object. Python has no command for declaring a variable. So instead, a variable is created the moment you first assign a value to it. So for example, x equals 5, now 5 equals x. So that's a variable. Y equals John. This is technically a string, but that's a variable. So we can actually use the type command, type function, sorry, to see what type of variable our variable is. So for example, if I say print type y, okay, and then I run it in the main, I'm gonna see that y is a string because it's got John. Okay, so these are basically variables. An interesting thing to note with variables, you can use both double speech marks, double quotes, or you can also use single quotes. So if I just use single quotes in Python, you can also use single quotes. So if I do the same thing, so class string, so I can also use single quotes. So that's that. Now suppose we have a variable and we have a data type like a number, and we want that number to be a particular type of variable. We can do that. So suppose if I said x equals, so I wanted the number, suppose I wanted the number 3 to be a string, okay, not an int. I could write down x equals 3. Okay, now this means that x will be 3. So whenever we type in the command 3, 3 is associated with x, but the difference is this time 3 is associated to a string type. Likewise, we could also do y equals int 4. So this means y will be 4, and we can also say z equals float 5, which means z will be 5.0, because obviously it's a floating point. So essentially what we have done here, we have assigned data values to particular types of variables. So we want 5 to be a floating variable, we want 4 to be an int, we want 3 to be a string. So let's see the data type. So if I do print type z, let's see what data type variable type z is. So we can see it's a float, because we know it's a float because we have already assigned it to that. Okay, so that's that. Now another interesting thing to note, sorry, is that with variables, Python is a kind of program such that it's a case sensitive language. Python is a case sensitive language, meaning the case you use, whether it's upper or lower case, will affect what kind of output or variable you're using. So for example, a equals 4 is one variable, capital A equals, say, study, this is a completely different variable. Notice how they're both a, but because this is capital A and this is lowercase a, they are two different variables, and that's because Python is a case sensitive language. Regarding variable names, we need to understand that variables can have different types of names. They can have very short names, they can have long names, they can have names with multiple words, as long as there's underscore or different capital letters. But the point is, there are 4 rules that we need to understand whenever we make variable names. Rule number 1, a variable must start with a letter or the underscore character. Okay, it has to start with a letter or numbers or an underscore character. This means a variable cannot start with a number. You can't start a variable with a number. And secondly, a variable name can only contain alphanumeric characters, underscores, e.g. A to Z, 0 to 9, and underscores obviously, but not anything else. You can't have a wacky like exclamation marks, if I'm not wrong. And the last thing which we mentioned earlier, variables, they have to be case sensitive, so you have to be very careful about the cases you use to start a variable, okay, because a different case can mean a completely different variable. So now that there's that, now that I've covered that, let me give you some examples of variable names which we cannot use. So for example, one second, to my var equals John. This is unacceptable because it starts with a 2. Okay, so that doesn't work. So to change this, we have to get rid. We've got to get rid of the 2. Another illegal variable name. My var equals John. This is illegal because we are using a character that's not within the characters that we can use to define variables. Okay, this is not an underscore, this is a hyphen. It's similar to using like an exclamation mark or whatever. We can't do that. We have to use an underscore, okay, to signify different words. Okay, so oh yeah, sorry, equals. A cool thing in Python, we can actually assign multiple variables in one line. So for example, suppose I do x, y, z, and I can assign them all to each corresponding variable. So orange will be corresponding to x. Let's say banana will be corresponding to y, and cherry will be corresponding to z. Okay, and we can declare this in just one line. So for example, if I want to print all these, print x, print y, sorry, print z. So let's run that in the main. Okay, so we're going to see orange, banana, cherry. So Python is able to actually connect these variables to each word we say that's corresponding, and that's very useful. Another interesting thing we can do is a thing called unpacking. So suppose we create lists. Now lists is another topic which we kind of need to go through at one point in the future, but suppose I write down a list. So suppose I say I want a list of games. Okay, list of games equals COD, Call of Duty, GTA, and Need for Speed, NFS. Okay, I could assign each of these values inside the list by using I can assign each of the values inside the list with a variable. Okay, so now that I've done this, I can say x, y, z equals games. Okay, so now what I've done, I've actually connected x to COD, y to GTA, and z to NFS. So if I run this in the main, we're going to see all the variables, they're all connected. Another thing in Python what we can do is we can actually combine different variables within Python. So often the print statement is used to output variables. However, we can use the plus character to combine two variables. So for example, let me say x equals Python is, y equals awesome. Okay, I can write down x equals z equals x plus y, right? They're both strings. In this case, notice how they're both strings because they have letters as the variables. I can add them together because they're the same variable type. So I can just write down print z. So if I run this in the main, I'm going to see, look, Python is awesome. Okay, I forgot to do this space. It should be fixed now. Python is awesome. So see how I've basically added two variables. We can also do a similar thing where I could suppose this was 5 and then this was say this was 6. Okay, if I run this in the main, it's 11. Okay, what I could also do, instead of even writing z, I could just say print x plus y. Okay, if I try to run this, now it's also done the same thing. We basically added the variables using the plus function. However, here's a very interesting thing you need to understand. You can't simply add different types of variables. So suppose y was a string called John. If I try to add it now, it's not going to work. Look, because they're different types of variables. Convert this x plus y into some kind of print function that we can add. We have to convert one of the values to make them the same type of variable. So for example, x equals 5 is clearly an integer, so we need to convert x into a string as y is a string. So what we can do, if we can just write down str string brackets this, and now it should be able to add. That's it. Okay, now I'm going to quickly try to talk about global variables. Global variables is basically any variable we create outside of a function. Okay, global variables, they are variables that exist outside of functions, and they can be used into anything inside the code. Let me explain. So suppose I have a function. Okay, what happened here? It's quite annoying. And then I write down print Python is, then I add the function. Okay, this when I say plus x, this is referring to this x over x variable over here, and it's a global variable, so it can be used anywhere. It can be used inside this function or anywhere. So when I call the function, I actually have to write the function separately. My func. Okay, when I call this function, I'm going to be able to see that it's going to say, oh, what's going on here? Oh yeah, I forgot the exclamation mark. So it's going to say Python is awesome, and that's because it's using the global variable. Opposite to a global variable is a local variable. Suppose local variables, by the way, they can have the same name. Suppose I say this, x is cool. Now local variables can only be used inside of their same function. So this x does not refer to this x equals awesome over here, it refers to x equals cool, and it can only be used with this function here. So if I write down my function, it's going to say, when I call the my function, it's going to say Python is cool because it's applying this local variable x. Suppose I have a separate code and I say Python has to be, and then I add plus x. So what x variable do you think it's going to be using here? It's not going to be using the local variable because the local variable is only used inside the my function. This x will be using the global variable, okay, which is x equals awesome. So when we print it, we're going to see Python is cool, which refers to the first my function, and we're going to see Python has to be awesome, and it's using the word awesome referring to the global variable of x. Okay, what we can do, we can convert a local variable into a global variable. So all we have to do is use this small command global x. Okay, so now that we've used the word global x, firstly I have to call in the function first, if I'm not wrong. Now when I type in print Python has to be plus x, it's going to be using this local variable, which is now a global variable because I used the global function. Okay, we can also change the value of a global variable inside a function. So for example, suppose if this was initially x equals awesome. Okay, hold on a minute. This is a global variable and this is a local variable. What I can do by doing this, essentially what I'm doing, I am essentially what I'm doing, I'm actually I'm changing this x function from a global variable to the local variable. It's still going to be a global variable. However, it's going to use this now. So when we type it, when you run it in the main, Python has to be cool. Okay, because I changed it. I changed the global variable. So that's that. Let me cover indentation. So Python, unlike other programming languages, it doesn't actually use indentation for just readability. The indentation in Python is very important because it's used to indicate a block of code. Here's what I mean. If I write down if 5 is greater than 2, okay, and then I write down here print 5 is greater than 2, okay, if I run this in the main, it's not going to work, and that's because the indentation is incorrect. The indentation is such that this is not one block of code. If you just press the tab button, now the indentation is correct, as this print function is inside the code. So now if I run it in the main, it works. So that's it for this lecture, guys. Thank you for watching. If you watched all of it, please stay tuned for more videos and hopefully watch the whole series. Take care, bye. And please subscribe.